What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Tequila Tuesday. I think this is the either 69th or 70th edition now of Tequila Tuesday. So you're looking at over 100 hours of recorded sales training from all of your favorite trainers, coaches, leaders, thought leaders, all this kind of stuff out there in the LinkedIn universe. Appreciate every single one of them and all of you for spending some time with us. So today we got a special guest. His name is Damien Woodfull. He's the sales team lead for the mid-market at a company called Thinkific, if I said that right. And runs his own. I got it right. How about that? Right. And does his own training and consulting on the side, and is kind of working on building that up as a significant second stream of income for himself. And for the first time in history, we have a guest who is a partner of somebody who was a previous guest. So Damien is fiance, I think, right, Damien?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Emily Johnson, who was with us a while back, talking about burnout and stuff. They are together. So that's kind of cool. So Damien's going to talk to us today about getting off of autopilot, being mindful in the sales process, and a bunch of other stuff. As usual, drop your questions in the chat. You can take yourself off mute. Just try not to interrupt him or anybody else. And we'll get after it. Damien, I will get out of the way.
Alrighty. I appreciate the intro. And I appreciate you all taking the time out of your evenings to chat and hang out. So yeah, appreciate you being here. As you can tell, this is the topic that we'll be discussing. It might be a little bit vague to some, but we're going to dive in and give a little backdrop before we get started. So I love to do a little check-in to see how we're doing before we dive in. So if you want to just share this in the chat, that would be great. A check-in is a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being fantastic, 1 maybe not so good. This is not about getting a high number. This is about tuning into how you're feeling right now. This is something that I do frequently throughout my day to check in and make sure that I'm in that place I need to be. So I just invite you now just to take a moment, put it in the chat, and now put a word with that. So for example, I'm going to say mine out loud. I would say I'm an 8, and I would say I'm optimistic. That's the word I would use. So just bringing ownership into how you're feeling right now. So I just encourage you all to do that. Perfect. Alrighty. Okay, now that we've checked in, I just want you to take that into the session, just feeling whatever that is. If you are a 1, if you are a 2, that is all good. Just acknowledge that and accept that. A little bit about me. I am one of many, I guess, who kind of found his way into sales unintentionally, perhaps. I went to University of Waterloo, which is a school known for kind of tech and startups. So I got involved in that community, launched my own company out of school. Things didn't quite pan out. From there, I went and traveled for a while. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Launched a brewery, got into tech sales. Long story short, hit a bit of a dark place, had some concussion issues. And I was burnt out. I couldn't even get around my day-to-day as a rep. Like I wasn't myself. I wasn't able to navigate and show up as myself. So I kind of hit rock bottom. And I kind of learned to develop a toolkit to help me with that. So became a yoga teacher, became a meditation teacher, and kind of took some of those principles into my day-to-day as someone that is in the sales space. So, working with teams now, and my team in particular, I've seen kind of the influence and need for some of these things that I had learned in my yoga teacher training. So kind of did like this little weird fusion where I've kind of been messing around with taking some of these like yoga and mindfulness concepts and applying them to the sales world as we know it. So here I am currently still selling, but also, this is the topic and the part of my life that I'm most passionate about. So I'm here to hopefully help give back and answer any questions, because this is what I believe to be my purpose. So happy to be here. So we're going to start off real basic here around what is mindfulness, just because this lays foundation into this session. This is not all about mindfulness, but it's important to take it into the session. I would love to keep this conversational. If you guys have any thoughts, like even not in the chat, just chatting. What do you think mindfulness is? It can be very obvious because this is a word that I believe is a bit of a buzzword now and maybe overused, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what is mindfulness.
I would say it's living with intention, or trying to at least be intentional.
Yes, absolutely.
That's better than my initial thought. My initial thought was sort of being present in the moment in whatever I'm doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right or wrong.
Totally.
That was my thought. I actually think Cynthia's thought is much better than mine.
I think those are both
That was
bang
what I
on,
thought of.
to be honest. Yeah. No, those are both very accurate. Anyone else?
I think about it a little different. There's
Okay.
And this is all new to me, the last, I'm going to say 5 years. I've been threatening to learn to meditate for about a decade, and finally got off my butt about 5 years ago and started. And I still suck at it, by the way. It's not easy, but it's kind of getting out of your own head and living in the moment. And by that, I mean, so much of the time I've got a monkey brain. I'm always thinking about the next thing. What do I got to do next? What do I got to do next? What are the priorities? When am I going to get them done? And you just sometimes need to just chill and take life by the moment. And those moments are fast, and just kind of understand them. If they're bad, it's going to be over very quickly. If they're good, it's probably going to be over very quickly. But just getting out of your own head and living in the moment.
I love that, John. That's super real and very much exactly what mindfulness is, for sure. One simple line, again, those are all right, but really for me, it's about giving attention and intention to what's happening right now without judgment. I think those last two words are huge, without judgment, especially in our day-to-day, and let's say specifically to sales. I think there is a lot of judgment, whether it's self-judgment or others around us. Without judgment is key when we're discussing mindfulness. So yeah, appreciate all those responses. So why the hell does mindfulness in sales matter? Curious to hear thoughts on this.
Go in the same order. Come on, Cynthia.
Well, I would say that and mindfulness is important in sales because it's you're taking the right actions. Because I think one of the biggest challenges I always had in sales was not wanting to do the hard stuff like cold calling, outreach, and that would be the stuff that would actually fill my pipeline. So that intentionality would be like, if I'm really trying to like make the most of my time, I'd work on the hard tasks first. So to me, that would be much more mindful and much more intentional versus avoiding the hard stuff or even a hard conversation with the client. Sometimes you'd have to have a tough conversation, and I would absolutely avoid that, do every single thing I could to avoid it, and then finally have it. And it was such a relief once it was done. It felt so good. Like, why did I put this off? And you just waste a lot of time. You can waste a lot of time.
For sure. No, totally right. Appreciate that.
With my theme of kind of being present in the moment, I think it matters because it's the only way to really listen and hear what's being said by the prospect or prospects during the course of the conversation. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back and listened to sales calls of people and paused it and said to the rep, "Hey, Damien, did you hear what just happened right there?" And Damien's like, no. What happened? And I play it again. And then Damien's like, wow, I never even heard that on the call. So for me, I need to be very like in the moment in order to listen to everything and hear everything that's being said. That's one part. The second part is there's a famous quote by Michael Jordan. I'm going to screw it up, but he basically said, like, when everything else in his life was falling apart, he knew if he stepped onto the basketball court, like he was in total control and nothing could touch him. Basically, it was like a sanctuary. And so mindfulness matters to me when I'm working, because this is my arena, my element. Like nothing else going on outside of my life gets to fuck with me right now. And so I can block all of that stuff out and be present in doing this thing and doing this thing well, which I know that I'm good at. And that's helpful for me.
That is bang on as well. That is a really good answer. Anyone else? Maybe one more. There's no right or wrong here. I'm just hearing it out.
I think a lot of times especially when you're in sales, really almost any role, when you're doing it, you're good at it, you're doing it all the time, you're kind of moving through it. You kind of get in the habit of just going, get it done, move on to the next thing. And one of the things that I try to keep in mind sometimes, let's say I'm going in to do a big presentation for a proof of concept. Big deal. Okay. I used to just go in and just start. And what I really try to remember is I go in and just change it up a little bit, stop to get myself in the right framework and say, listen, I'm prepared today to talk about the proof of concept that we've discussed, the budget, the rollout, and everything. But before I begin, has anything changed since we last spoke? And it gives me an opportunity to give them an opportunity to tell me something that they may have had a big change. Somebody left the team, somebody joined the team. There's been a change of direction. There's a new focus. There's a budget issue. Gives you an opportunity to kind of reframe it before you just jump in with the assumptions that I've already made, hopefully right, but could be wrong. And I find that to be useful, and other tools like that to kind of reframe things before you jump into something with a client.
All beautiful responses. And I think that is almost like that check-in that we did at the start today, even doing that before a call, and the power that can have, for sure. Appreciate that. Yeah. And also I think it's important to note that, workplaces are the leading source of stress and burnout, right? So this is a big thing to acknowledge, like mindfulness and sales is important because we're in an arena that is pretty damn stressful. So that alone is obviously going to be tough. So just acknowledging that first before we dive in. Also, a little uncrushed number here, 60% of salespeople said the performance was poor because of mental health issues. This is current, over half. So that is probably a little bit too high. So this is really about helping reps, VPs, whatever, build the emotional, mental capacity that allows them to be present and be the best version of themselves, really. Because only when you are present are you able to be. So overall, kind of high level, that's really why mindfulness in sales is really important. We're working on developing the driver and not just the car. I love this analogy because, we think about maybe Formula One. So much goes into the car, right? And maybe we can compare that with our tech stack that we use day to day in sales. And you can do all that work to that car, but at the end of the day, if the driver is not ready and capable, they're just going to crash and all that money just goes down the drain, right? So this kind of work that we're doing is working on that driver concept and using kind of the analogy that Scott used there with Michael Jordan, right? It's off the court work so that when we're on court, we can perform, we can be the best, and we can do things properly and implement all the strategies and trainings that we've learned. So that's really what we're focusing on. A couple other reasons, kind of what you all had kind of mentioned there. It allows us to respond rationally and effectively rather than emotionally, right? So sometimes, how many times on a call or whatever do emotions get the best of us? So by having mindfulness and using pause and check and awareness to our state, we're able to respond in that way. So it also helps us navigate our own emotions. So it keeps our emotional and mental well-being cup full, and also our prospects' emotions. So kind of what you were saying there, Scott, regarding kind of the needs of our customer and their pain, only when we're properly able to hear and understand are we able to navigate. So these are really important. And then lastly, priming our nervous system for these high performance role that we're in, right? Sales is the high performance athlete of the workplace, right? Whether it's as a rep or as a VP, you're expected to get results. This is high performance. It's like an athlete analogy. You've got to put points on the board. If you're not going to probably make the cut. So how can we prime our nervous system to be able to handle that so that we have resilience when stress comes? So that's really kind of the work that we'll be doing. what part of your day do you feel the most reactive? This is a very general kind of question, but I'd love to maybe hear thoughts on this. The intention here is to get you thinking, like, when are some moments maybe in my day where emotions sometimes do get the best of me? This is a bit of a vulnerable topic, so I appreciate if you don't want to share, but if you can think of maybe some generic situations in your day that you feel reactive, I'd be curious to hear.
I'll go first. I feel reactive first thing in the morning, frankly, because I have clients all over the world. And, sometimes I wake up and like shit's already on fire because my client in Romania and my client in Spain have sent me messages while I was asleep. So that happens sometimes. Other times that is really hard, is it really messes with trying to be mindful, is I'll be on a meeting with a client and I can see my notifications going insane. Like I can see my inbox or my Slack messages or whatever, and it's just from other parties, and it's like trying to pull me away. That makes me feel reactive more than proactive as well.
Yes, I love that example. Anyone else?
I think towards the end of the day, like for me, you end up getting more reactive as things are like piling up on you. And I think priority based, like I try to get up super early. So like I'm a 4 or 5 a.m. person so that I can get stuff done before anyone else is up. And then as the day goes on, things just kind of pile up. So I think near the end of the day is definitely reactive. Plus you start pushing against like family time or other things that are happening. So you get into that space of a bit of anxiety, which will drive emotions, which drives reactiveness.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, Dill. Maybe one more thought. If not, no worries. I can move on here. All right. Keep it moving. Again, just wanted to get the brain thinking there. No right or wrong. Just want to also kind of touch on some of these benefits. So when you're talking about these situations, these moments, you're bringing awareness to, your day-to-day and to these moments. So mindfulness really is about, understanding and having that emotional regulation, right? So understanding where we're at, being able to, like what you had just mentioned, Dale and Scott there about, maybe being a bit frustrated, understanding that, accepting that, noticing that is the first step. And then you can begin to regulate that. So with mindfulness, it brings us awareness to how we're feeling, right? So in our day-to-day, that alone, just stopping right there and saying that and acknowledging that is the first step to kind of be like, okay, yeah, that's mindfulness. That's it. That is the start, the awareness piece. So mindfulness, obviously one benefit of that is being able to regulate the emotions, also building compassion, empathy. You can create connection with others by being able to relate, but also properly hear them out to build that connection and empathy. And this is great, obviously, when you're selling, to build that connection with a buyer. So, these are some benefits that we'd experience in sales, but also obviously to stay calm, focused, and productive during stress, right? So the stress isn't allowing us to kind of be crippled or consumed that, it can sometimes do, right? So with mindfulness, these are some benefits that we're able to kind of beat that a little bit. Just really quickly, a little line. Mindfulness is awareness of the present moment with an attitude of non-judgment and kindness. That's key too. A lot of us have judgment, self-judgment, and we are not always kind to ourselves. We might beat ourselves up for that. Like, oh shit, end of the day here, I'm getting angry. And we're hard on ourselves because of that. So if we can purely just notice it, accept it, and then react accordingly, that is going to be more beneficial than, judging and not having that self-compassion that is needed.
That's a good point. And very interesting that none of us mentioned the non-judgment part. We all left that part off. I suck at that for sure.
And we're so hard on ourselves. Like, people talk about compassion. self-compassion is something that I'm trying to work on. Like I'm so hard on myself when it comes to a lot of these
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah,
man,
Do you
for
think
sure.
it's the profession that we're in, that we all, have a little bit of imposter syndrome and this need to be perfect? That's why we don't give ourselves grace. I don't know. Just seems like everyone I meet that's
I think it's a trait of high achievers.
achieving. Yeah, the
Sure.
high achieving people for sure.
It's part, and then it becomes, I mean, Damien, you should chime in and shut me up, but like it becomes part of your identity a little bit too.
Yeah, no,
And it's hard
it
to shut
totally
that off.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think maybe for many, we're always striving for that next thing, and it's always about that next thing. And when I get there, I'll be this. And when I'm that'll be this. And we're not always present and just enjoying the current state, right? And just being grateful for what we have right now. And I think just bringing that into the mix can help with that too.
And I think it's super difficult because in sales, like we have high highs and low lows. And so it's almost like mindfulness on both sides, right? So like you can't get too high on the highs, and you can't get too low on the lows, because if not, then you're always like your adrenaline's always running. And I think that for me, that becomes a big thing. Like we were talking about the monkey brain, right? And like that adrenaline running. Like you got to be careful. Like you want to celebrate all these wins, but does it really, really matter? I guess in the larger picture, it matters. But if you get too high on the highs, then you're going to crash in the lows.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because yeah, I mean, I think sales is one of these unique things in the workplace where it is, high expectation, high rejection as well. You are rewarded for these highs, and the highs and lows are extremes. So yeah, how do you keep that balance? And it's crazy to think that many of us in the sales world don't have any training on how to navigate that. So yeah, I mean, that's why burnout is such a problem, in sales, and why there's a lot of turnover for reps in particular at organizations, because they can't handle that. They're not equipped with the tools to navigate that. So yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, though. It's a good point.
One thing that I personally worry about on this topic is I know that I beat myself up and tell myself that kind of story, but I also feel like that's one of the reasons I am where I am. And so I'm worried that if I stop doing that, then I lose my fire in my belly that like has set me apart from everybody else. And I become like average. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it's a blessing and a curse in some way, maybe I'm the only one
I think
who thinks that, but
I mean,
Matt phrased it really well in the chat right there.
What did Matt say? Sorry.
He said, how do I show myself grace without letting myself off easy? Maybe you can help us navigate that one, Damien.
The best way I can kind of describe this situation is trusting the process and putting in the work. So judging yourself success determined based on the work that is put in. So Scott, you have to do these things to be successful. Do those things, grind, be the best, do the work. But at the end of the day, there are so many things out of our control. And I'm just trying to tie this back to sales, whether it's hitting quota, whatever it might be. Judge yourself knowing that if you're putting in the work, you're doing the right things, success will come. I think for me, that has been my saving grace, is detaching from the outcome. It's hard to say. It's not always what people want to hear, but shit, the moment you do that, it's not saying don't work hard. It's saying work even harder, but just don't judge your success on the outcome of some situations that are a little bit out of your control. Like I think knowing that we're doing the right things is what we should be focusing on. So to your point, Scott, like really focusing on the things that you have to do to get there, and having done that, okay, that's success. You are successful in your eyes. So maybe it's how we view success that needs to be shifted a bit. I think that's something that's worked for me anyways. So I think there's a lot of different opinions on this. It's a super debatable topic, but that's something that's worked for me.
Good.
Yeah. But the big thing here is like with awareness, this gives you choice, and choice leads to change, right? So Only when you have awareness of your current state do you have choice, and only then can you change. So without awareness, if you're on autopilot, just linking this into our session today, you have no choice. You're just constantly stuck in one place. And how can you bring change if you don't have awareness for that choice? So this is something that I kind of want to get the gears thinking about a little bit too. One of the best ways to have awareness to break autopilot, which we're now going to start talking about, is through the stop technique, which is like a classic. You can just Google this, very common in the meditation space. And it's simple. You just stop what you're doing. You take a breath, you observe your feelings. So do what we did at the check-in. So it's something you can do. You can set an alarm on your watch. You can put a little hold on your calendar for 5 minutes, just says check in. You literally just stop, you take a breath, you tune in. How am I feeling right now? Okay, I'm a 5, feeling a little bit anxious. Okay, proceed. Just that stop is going to bring that continual awareness, which will dampen and eventually stop autopilot, which will then bring awareness to where we are in a long-term state, which will allow us to adjust accordingly. So this is a really, really cool tool that is easy. And if you can take something away from this, just try this stop technique 3 or 4 times a day. And I think you'd be amazed at the awareness that comes out of that. Any thoughts, questions?
Would love to hear from some people who have yet to chime in, if you could.
Yeah,
Terry, go for it. Help us out.
yeah, I'll say something real quick, just because it kind of relates back to what was going on in the chat about checking emails right when you wake up, this autopilot and kind of the awareness to evaluate what's going on. So I used to do this, set my alarm on my phone, wake up, check emails. I wouldn't respond to the emails. I would just check them. But what that would mean if something pissed me off would be, while I'm getting ready and taking a shower and getting dressed and trying to get my kids ready for school and get them to school for whatever that, 45 minutes to an hour and a half is, I'm already triggered. I'm already thinking about things outside. I'm not present in the things that I'm doing, especially for my family. And I wasn't replying. So I wasn't actually making real progress. I wasn't doing anything other than just putting myself on tilt at the very beginning of the day and missing that hour and a half window. So it took that awareness or recognizing, like, what the hell am I doing? What's the benefit? What's the benefit of doing this to me? And it's absolutely zero. So I stopped it. It just felt like, well, I'm competitive and I'm goal oriented. And if I use that time, if I start working immediately when I wake up, I get 30 extra minutes of data to get closer to my goals. And it's like, I'm just thinking about it all wrong. So yeah, I don't know. That's my thoughts here. Thanks.
Oh man, Terry, that's bang on. And I mean, it's actually teeing us up nicely to what we're going to be talking about in a minute here. And one thing that you do when you start work right away in the morning, and Scott, even linking back to what you were saying earlier, like when you work in all these time zones, your nervous system is going into this heightened state, this fight or flight state, right? And it's just thrown into that. And oftentimes we don't come out of that. We're just stuck in that. It's like, all right, now that's me for the day. I'm in fight or flight all day. And that's not how we as people are meant to live, right? Because your nervous system, when it's in fight or flight, is conserving energy, right? So this means your appetite might be less. This means your digestive system's conserving energy in order to be fight or flight. We'll chat about this more, but Terry, that's a great example. Autopilot, why does it happen? Anyone have a thought on this? I just kind of said a lot of it, but any additional thoughts on why it happens?
I think many of the times we're just in patterns, right? We get into these patterns and cycles, and it's super hard. Like one of the things that you were just saying that made a lot of sense is having choices. So when you're aware and you can make a choice, I think a lot of times we think internally we don't have choices, but the reality is we have a lot of choices. And the question is, what choice do you make that is going to resolve or not what you're doing? Like as Terry was saying, like if you wake up and you're not resolving anything, it's just sitting in the back of your head. So how do you, when you get something, how do you get to resolution so that you can move on with it? So it's, I think autopilot is just based on patterns that we have. And I think autopilot, not only when I think of autopilot in the sales world, I think of it like 2 or 3 years, or if you're in a job for a long period of time you're not present because you're used to doing a demo or you get through a script and you just go through the process over and over and over and over again. And then like a year later, you're like, why am I doing the same presentation I did, 12 months ago? Because you just get into a pattern and you feel like that's the right thing to do, yet you're not even listening to what your clients have to say.
I think I'm guilty of that too. When we do something long enough, like you said, we get in a pattern and we're not aware, we're just kind of in that autopilot state. So yeah, that's a great example.
I think also,
sorry.
I think our brains only have a certain amount of capacity to work and to focus all the time. And being turned on and being in that hyper present state all the time is just impossible. So I think that also there's an important role that autopilot thing plays in giving us a chance to recover, chance to do work in a state that's not 100% hyper focused, but actually still get things done, be productive. Upstanding members of society and do what we need to do to, basically be healthy, right? Financially, emotionally, etc. So I think it also plays an essential role in counterbalancing a state of hyper awareness that really, in a practical sense, just isn't possible. Sorry.
No, for sure. I think there's a time and a place for autopilot. You're bang on. That's so true. I think the only issue becomes when those autopilot tasks are, draining or leading to burnout or these different types of things, right? Like sometimes people are caught in autopilot and they're not even aware how stressed out they are. They're just like go from call to call, jumping around. They at the end of the day, they're like, holy shit, I'm so tired. I wonder why. But their body was probably giving them signs throughout the day to like slow down or maybe take a break. But that autopilot just kept them going and going and going. So you're totally right. The issue just becomes when those tasks are draining and the burnout kind of side of things can happen. So this is a nice tee up though, Evan, to this one here. It's a little bit off topic, but relevant here. So real versus imagined fear, what's the difference? This is a question that I have for anyone.
I would say it's all imagined. I mean, everything is just what we put meaning on, right? So, I mean, obviously real fear is when something's coming at us that could cause us physical harm and immediate danger, but the stuff we make up in our head and we get fearful about is just a story. So if you change the meaning of the story, the fear changes. Does that make sense, or am I?
You're saying exactly what I want to hear. And chasing by a tiger, getting chased by a tiger might be the real fear.
Right.
But how many times we really ever chased by a tiger? So the answer is most of our fear is imagined. And I'll just let that marinate. So what's crazy is stress is just a fancy word for fear, right? So when we think about that, fear is mostly imagined and stress is really just fear. Mindfulness allows us to help distinguish between real fear and imagined fear by having that awareness and the attention to what's happening. We can switch using our emotional brain instead of our thinking brain, allowing us to make better decisions around stress, right? So with mindfulness, we can say like, this fear or this stressful situation that there are some stressful situations, no doubt, but we have a lot of imagined fears, the what ifs and all these types of things, right? And the emotional brain can kind of run with that. So the thinking brain is what we need to activate in order to have reason and be able to allow us to make these decisions around stress. So I'm kind of teeing us up into this next topic that we're going to be chatting about here. Fear triggers our fight or flight state, right? So, when you're getting chased by that tiger, let's go back to the evolution of humans, right? We needed our energy to be preserved. We needed that heightened senses, right? Our sight, sound, smell, we're surviving, right? But the reality is these situations don't really happen. The problem is the body doesn't know the difference. So imagine fear or real fear to the body is signaling and triggering fight or flight. Now the body is still responding the same way. So if we have a lot of these, imagined fears, the body's going into fight or flight, and it's responding in that way, which allows us to be kind of tunnel vision, to focus. And that's fine, but it can lead to that path of autopilot without awareness to what's happening around us in our day-to-day. So as we've evolved, this fight or flight piece has not. And real or imagined fear is treated the same way in the body. So yeah, like fear, anxiety is only created when we think or imagine we could be in harm's way, right? So just something to think about, just kind of let that process. So how can we regulate this? Also, before I dive into how we regulate this, any questions on that? Anything not clear?
No, we've all got PhDs in catastrophizing, according to Thomas.
All right, cool. So basically, we've acknowledged it. That is the awareness piece. Now, how can we regulate this? We breathe. Very, very simple. I know it sounds ridiculous, but having that awareness, doing that pause and check, and breathing and tuning in will actually snap that fight or flight, will actually snap that autopilot, bringing full awareness and awareness to what's happening kind of in that moment. So that breath is super, super powerful. We can dive deep into the science of polyvagal theory. Not necessarily here to do that, but one thing you can kind of keep in mind here is a traffic light system. So when we're in a safe state, green. When we're in a dangerous state, fight or flight, yellow. When we're in a life-threatening situation, we're in red. Okay, so when we're in our day-to-day and we're in fight or flight, this is yellow. Okay, now what that can do, you can see on the right, is it can increase blood pressure, heart rate. Yeah, it has to. That's how we survived, going back to that evolution piece of fight or flight. So, in the long run, obviously this can lead to a lot of health issues. So just kind of acknowledging that if you're in that fight or flight and why you don't want to be in fight or flight all the time. Fight or flight is okay for a little bit at times. You just don't want to be stuck in it forever. But the danger here is when you move from fight or flight to freeze or shut down. And this is what happens when, we've probably all experienced it. You just want to maybe lay on the couch and just do nothing. Maybe for some people, just like curl up in a ball and just shut down. Happens to sellers all the time. They're just like, I don't even want to get on a phone. I don't even want to talk to anybody. They've hit this full kind of shutdown, this red light. So this is kind of what will happen in the nervous system. So how do we move up and down, and how do we regulate this? We can kind of think of this as a ladder. Green is obviously the safe place that we want to be. If we find ourselves in yellow through our pause and check and being like, oh yeah, I'm in fight or flight right now. A simple pause and check and that breath or meditation, if you want to do that, you don't have to, will bring us back into safety. Now, if it goes unattended for a period of time and we're functioning in this yellow state, some of us are functioning in this state or have been even our whole lives. The worry is just getting into red. If you are in red, you can move from red to yellow. How do you move from red to yellow? Light movement, things like this will actually take the nervous system from red to yellow. So if you find yourself in that red state, some light movement, whether it's even a walk outside, simple, powerful, will take you from red to yellow. If you're in yellow, a little pause and check, a little bit of breath work will take you from yellow to green. These are just different ways you can kind of work with the nervous system. You can look this up, the polyvagal theory. It's pretty amazing just to kind of apply it as a concept and bring it into your day-to-day in that kind of traffic light concept. So I encourage you to even just remember that. But the main key to self-regulate is to create safety, right? So we're creating safety and feeling safe in whatever we're doing, because if we're not feeling safe, we're not going to be able to stay in that green state. So safety is defined in, many different ways, but you have to feel safe inside. And I know you might think like of physical harm. It's not even that. It's just feeling safe in terms of contentment as to where you are and what you're doing. Any questions on that before a little exercise here?
Exercise time.
All right, let's do it. So we're going to do this together, if that's cool with everybody. It's not going to take long. Just to practice, this is something I would encourage you to maybe add to your day if you can. So we'll start out with a little pause and check. So if you want to just step away from the screen, you can even look away from the screen for a moment and just take a quick breath and just tune into the body. Just tune into how you're feeling right now on a scale of 1 to 10. And a word that you would bring to that. Just bring awareness to how you're feeling right now. And you can go deeper into this and maybe tune into the body as well and see where stress is showing up for you. But let's just start out with the traffic light. Where are you at right now out of those three? So if it's a green, yellow, or red, just noticing where you are without judgment, with awareness, with acceptance of wherever you are. And then if you can figure out in the body where you're feeling that emotion, a lot of us carry it maybe in our neck, our back. Just tune into that a little bit. Just bring some curiosity. Again, no judgment. So if you are feeling like, shit, I'm in red right now and my neck is super tense, cool. Get curious, accept that, allow that. What does that feel like? Just kind of feel that a little bit. And then from there, just tuning into the breath, begin to kind of lengthen the breath a little bit and just allow your body to know that everything is okay, that, you know, where you are right now is okay, that everything is temporary in that sense, and just have a bit of awareness of that. So obviously I just kind of ran through that quickly. You could elaborate on that more or less, but it's just allowing you to take, like, that took what, a minute, 2 minutes? You can take that in your day and just constantly be tuning in. If you can do this, you know, even once a day, that's a win. And then maybe you do it more and more. And I would be curious to hear how that goes for you. But I can promise you, with awareness, like I said earlier, it will give you choice, which will lead to change. So yeah, I would encourage you to practice that. All right, any questions? I don't want to ramble anymore.
What do you think about using the how-oriented questions as another means to potentially kind of roll back that red to yellow to green? I've always found that personally to be really helpful, but I'm really curious what other people think or have experienced with using it. It was recommended to me by a therapist once upon a time who said it's a great way to just check into the prefrontal cortex and start getting into real what's the word I'm looking for? Critical thinking skills, so that you're not caught in that fight or flight state. It was actually recommended to me as a means to break up a fight. Ask the person that wants to fight how questions, so that their brain starts to go a little slower and think a little deeper and kind of slow down a little bit instead of being stuck in that I think it's a loop, that violent fight flight loop where you're just like constantly making one decision or the other. And then you get to check out of that and realize, oh, the world's a little bit bigger when someone asks that how question. Wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
And can you give me a little bit more, like when you say the how question, like some examples?
So how is violence going to solve this situation? How, or if it's, you know, if it's internal to myself, I'm asking myself, how is being worried about this helping this situation right now? Another one is, you know, how can I, if one of the tools that I tend to use a lot when I'm in a really anxious state, which is all the time, is you know, if I'm worried about this, is there something I can do about it? Because if there is, I'm procrastinating. If there's nothing that I can do about it, then I'm just self-torturing myself. So one of those two things kind of comes into play at some point or other, and I try and solve it with how questions. How can I solve this issue? How can I do something about this that makes the pain a little bit less? And those how questions kind of, I don't know, they help me. I would love to know if they help others as well, or if it's,
I mean,
useful.
What you're saying, Evan, is exactly what we were talking about earlier with enabling the thinking brain and reducing the emotional brain, right? Like when we're in that fight state, that's the emotional brain just taking over. And by asking the how questions, you're triggering the thinking brain, which allows us to come out of that. So you're definitely onto something there, man. I think that totally makes sense to me. I don't know if anyone else has had experience with that, but to me, that makes sense because the thinking brain will disarm and overpower the emotional brain, taking us out of that state. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
So one thing, this is going back a little bit. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. I'm just flipping through here. This is good. Just keep
going back
on
to
chatting.
the kind of giving yourself grace and not letting yourself easy. So one of the things years of therapy has helped with me is kind of inverting the golden rule, right? So you treat others how you want to be treated. Treat yourself how you would treat someone else has done well for me. Like you tend to go hard on ourselves sometimes because we expect the best, and not like a stranger, but maybe like a mentee, like tough love, but love being the operative word there as opposed to just being a dick about it.
No, I love that, Matt. I appreciate you sharing that. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Come on, y'all. Questions.
Questions, concerns, disagreements? We can just open this up now to chat about really anything relevant or not.
So one of the things I think about, Damien, like super good presentation, by the way, thanks. Because I think a lot of times, like just having a presentation like this to stop and think versus like just do and do and do, like can change the trajectory of how people think about it. How can, one of the things I think about is individually you have to be responsible for it, but how can more leaders take this type of process and implement it into their methodology, right? Because I think a lot of it will start from how the leader executes on it. I think about it a lot when I'm leading sales teams, like how can I implement these types of things, enable them, have a little bit of not just transparency, but kind of some making sure that they know that it's a safe place to have some of these conversations. So I'm curious how you've integrated it into leadership training or leadership execution.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of sessions with leadership around mindful communication and kind of applying this into the workplace. And it's tough for sales because I know Scott, like you were posting there a little while ago too about being more than just a number, right? And the importance of this as a sales rep, but it's hard because a lot of us, I'm just thinking like as a rep, maybe under a leader, we tie ourselves and our self-worth to that number. And, when we're not hitting, it can be really hard, right? And you doubt everything. And even though you might think you're more than that, at the end of the day, it feels like that's all that really matters. So I think as a leader, like communication in an open way is super, super important. So acknowledging the situation, talking to the rep, being like, hey, I understand you're going through a hard time right now. We're not where we need to be. I just want to let you know that I believe in you. You are more than just a number, and really getting that confidence up and creating that safe place through conversation and being vulnerable and being empathetic, I think is really important too, right? So it's like, hey, I was there. I've been there. Like opening it up to relate as opposed and talking with instead of talking down. I think that is super, super powerful to gain trust from a rep to a leader as well. I think, when we don't address this properly, this is where we have like reps kind of just be like, well, F this, I'm out of here. But it's amazing when you open up that communication, what happens, and you give that sense of belief that maybe that person isn't able to do internally. It's super powerful. I mean, I've seen it happen, like just that VP that believes and the person can feel it in that way and what it does in the long term. So I think mindful communication is a big piece. I mean, I could talk about this for a while, but I don't know if that helps at all, or if there's any points there you want me to dig in deeper.
No, I think it's good. I think, it's good to have individual like mindfulness, but I think for it to be super successful it's got to come from the top, because I think in sales there's probably like this shroud of like I can't be as vulnerable, or mindfulness isn't a thing, or mental health. Like some of these sales leaders
Yeah.
that I've run into are like hard asses, or like you got to be a hard ass, and it just doesn't really work that way. The way I see the evolution, not only of sales but organizations in general, like a lot of these anxiety things that are happening are based on really poor leadership. Like we think about all of the stuff that's happening in the big, all these layoffs that are happening. A lot of this initial process is probably based on poor planning, bad execution, and it's not really on the people that got laid off. Some of it is. I mean, you can't put the blame on just the leadership, but a lot of it starts with the leadership. And how do you evolve from sales being a numbers game to sales being an empathetic execution game?
Well, I mean, the best analogy is like, let's look at sports. Let's look at the Brooklyn Nets right now. Let's look at players like Kyrie and Kevin Durant. For those of you that know basketball, tons of potential there, right? Like, if sure, numbers are important. We want points. We want to win the games. We want to, get the championship in theory. But at the end of the day, if there's issues with those people off the court, you think they're going to be able to perform to the level that they need to? Probably not. So if we can have that lens with our sales team and think of ourselves, as a coach, like maybe a Jackson or somebody that took a different approach to coaching, that took and valued the importance of off the court and on the court, and isn't just the coach. I think of kind of like what you're saying about some leaders as the coach that's just like screaming at halftime about wanting results. But at the end of the day, I would question him and be like, okay, well, what are you doing with the team in practice? What are you doing with the team around building a schedule for them that's going to allow for performance to be there? So I think going back to leaders, I think we have to look at ourselves in the mirror a little bit too, and say, am I providing my players with the resources they need to perform? And if you can't say yes, how can you expect them to perform at their best? So I think that analogy helps me a little bit. I don't know if that helps, but that helps me a lot.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah,
Damien.
Damien, I think the question about the danger of autopilot is super important. And I mean, and not just in our jobs, because obviously we're a whole person. I mean, I think personally, autopilot can really affect us. And for me, I've struggled with insomnia because I do have a hard time shutting down. And what I realized is, and I have done nothing about it, or I haven't done anything meaningful, and I need to, is that, you're going, and then watching TV and on the computer, and then, doing that every single night, binge watching whatever's on Netflix, and then trying to go to sleep, and you can't shut down. And then I have terrible sleep, and I wake up and I go right to my emails, and I start answering those before I even have a coffee in my hand. So I think that mindfulness and that autopilot and that's sort of like been my routine. But I think some of the strategies that you mentioned would be helpful in that respect. And so how do you, I'm assuming the conversations you have, that personal aspect falls into it. So what tips do you have? Because I do think like good sleep is very crucial, and definitely an aspect to kind of get away from autopilot, I would think. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, sleep is everything for sure. I mean, the biggest thing is that cortisol level, right? Like if we're in the morning, we want to slowly be raising it, and in the evening, we want to slowly be lowering it, right? Our cortisol or our stress level, right? So in the morning, if we're slowly raising that, think about things that would allow for that to happen. Going on your phone and looking at an email about something is going to spike that right away. And then you go drink your coffee, and that's going to spike it even more. So your cortisol is through the roof when you woke up. So I would just encourage people to try and slowly, kind of like a mountain, slowly raise that cortisol. Cortisol stress levels probably hit peak midday, but for some of us, we're just steady and flat, right? And it's the same in the evening. You should be winding down. So what are things that are going to, in your eyes, be enjoyable and not stressful. So maybe it's a long bath, maybe it's just watching the sunset, simple things like this. Whatever you feel feeds you to reduce your stress, that cortisol level, you need to do those things, because if you don't, you can't expect to be able to sleep, because your cortisol is just like this the whole time. So I would just encourage that slow gradual build up and that slow gradual come down to your day. And that is really powerful as well, because this is building a sustainable, overused word, but a sustainable approach to, let's say, to sales, because you're going to be able to handle these highs and lows. You're going to be able to be equipped properly for that day. You've had a good night's sleep, your cortisol's gradually built up. You're kind of in this peak form, ready to go. So that's one tip that I would maybe recommend. And just tuning into what feeds your soul, like what makes you feel relaxed, and just doing those things in the morning and in the evening.
I think Brian had a question. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, Damien.
Hey.
I'm still kind of struggling with the talk about imaginary fears. It seems to me like when you were talking about that, it sort of simplified these fears. And to me, when I'm feeling that way, at the top of the pyramid or whatever it was, I recognize that's an important thing in my life. So whatever's happening at that time, maybe I'm on a big client call, or, I'm talking to my manager, something's going on. That's my emotional self telling me that this meeting's important. This part of my life is important.
Mm-hmm.
It's important enough to me to spike these levels. So to me, that triggers something and makes me think about how I want to react to that, either in the moment or later or the next time. So like if you go back to the basic example of getting chased by a lion, you're going to think about the next path that you take, to walk around that lion, or you're going to, create a spear. You're going to do something. So when I feel those things, I know I need to do something to make that situation better and make sure that I'm more ready for that situation to happen in the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's that awareness piece. I mean, Brian, to what you're just saying there, like, imagine fear is totally cool, but just be aware of that and adjust accordingly. And again, awareness leads to choice leads to change. Keep going back to that. Like, you have awareness of that. That's totally okay if it's imagined fear, but just be aware of that and then adjust accordingly. So yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense to me. What you said, is that answer your question there?
Yeah, I think so, to a point. I mean, I'm struggling with the part of calling it like an imaginary fear, because I feel like these fears are still real to me. They're real.
Yeah.
And I don't want to oversimplify it to say like, that's not a real thing. You can just imagine it and move on. To me, it's a very real fear that affects me physically, not just mentally. So, fear sparks, whatever things happen in my own body. And stress does the same thing if we're overstressed or too much of it. So I'm gonna use that understanding to then create less stress by being more productive, or being more prepared for the next meeting that I wasn't prepared for, whatever it might be. I'm struggling with the fact that we're kind of minimizing that fear.
Maybe don't take it so literal in its definition. The exercise is meant to separate being chased by a lion and the fact that your body responds the same way, right? So that was why we kind of were chatting about that. So the power of your fears, whether they're not being chased by a lion, whatever it might be, your body's responding the same way. So the analogy is just used to kind of separate those two things. It is real to you for sure, but the concept of what it does to the body is the same. So it's just kind of reminding us that, when we do have these fears, let's just say they're real fears, versus getting chased by a lion. The body is going into these states the same way it would if it was being chased by a lion. So just being aware of that and what it does to the body, and then reacting accordingly. Because you're totally right. They can be real. Each of us may define it differently. So I'm with you 110%. I think it's just that awareness of it. So yeah, don't think of imagined even as the word there.
That's fair. Thanks.
Yep.
Other questions for Damien? I have a question.
Yes, sir.
My question is, how do we take this stuff that we've been learning about and flip it around and get our prospects to take this in and feel it? How do I take like a stressed out prospect who's running around with their head cut off and inject some of this mindfulness that I have in spades into them to help me during my sales process? That's what I want to do.
Yep. Yeah. So it's, the conversation might be something like, hey, Scott, like, we're chatting about your day. You might be telling me about it. I think that empathy piece, compassion, but empathy purely about relating. Oh yeah, I know exactly how that is. That must be putting yourself in their shoes and letting them hear that, I think is really powerful. It also can disarm the conversation a little bit when you start being vulnerable and opening up to a prospect. You can build a bit of a connection there. So I think one thing you can do is just kind of like relating to the situation and hearing them out if they are in a super stressful state and they feel like sharing that, genuine empathy. Exactly. Yeah. And exactly. You're not doing it to be fake. It's just being curious and being empathetic is powerful. And think of yourself as a buyer, as a prospect, like you're going through a crazy day and you get on, you're like, man, this day is nuts. And the person you're talking to is like, oh man, what's going on? Like, tell me about that a little bit more. And you're just there to just be a good person and curious and just, be a little bit empathetic. And you don't need to like know or relate to everything, but just being an ear, I think builds a connection in a special way.
Yeah. I love that.
That's what I found.
Be an ear for them. One of the things that I have tried to do that I think has been helpful is sometimes I just call out what I see and I'm like, you all right, Jill? You seem like you got a lot going on over there. And then she just like barfs up all of this stress and all this shit that she's going through. And she's just like, oof, and lets it all out. And I'm like, oh, it's a lot. Feel better now that you got that off your chest? And the prospect will be like, yeah, actually I do. So, okay, let's get after this. You know what I mean? And it's like,
man, totally.
I try to like use that advantageously.
Yeah, you do that really well, Scott. I would add to that though, it's really important to be authentic when you ask somebody how they are and really provide that space, because so many people just ask how you are as an automated kind of question, but they don't leave the space for someone to feel like they can share.
That's a really good point, Jill. And I think if you genuinely are curious and genuinely are empathetic and these are real things, it's going to be really, really powerful. But yeah, Scott, I also love that too. Like if it's your second or third call, with a prospect, you've met them a few times, you kind of know, you can be like, hey, like, how's the day going? You good? You seem a little like tired or something. If you feel like you're in that place where you can say that, it's powerful for sure. Yeah.
For sure.
Apologize, I haven't really been on the chat here. Just trying to read a little bit now. Yeah, acknowledging the obvious is great.
Anybody else got questions for Damien? Okay.
Hey, Damien, when we're going through our day and a lot of us are either on the phone or on Zoom meetings, with other people at the time where something stressful might be happening. So when that happens, how do you stay present with the person that you're meeting with or talking to, but also helping yourself and your body de-stress a little bit and using those methods?
Right. So you mean like go, 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 you have like no breaks kind of thing?
Some days, sure, are like that. You have 3, 4, 5 meetings in a day. You still got to get calls in, still got to get your emails out, eat a little bit. But, I guess my question is more like, we don't necessarily control when our biggest stressful moments happen. And if they might happen when we're on the phone or talking to another person, what can we do to keep ourselves present while also helping ourselves relieve some of that?
Awareness and acceptance, 2 words. Aware of it, accepting it, allowing it, and not freaking out about it, right? Because if that stress comes at a time, the natural response is probably like, oh shit, blank, 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 blank. Instead, changing that talk track to be like, okay, I'm feeling a bit of stress here right now. That's okay. I'm gonna let that stress be there. And when you disarm it and allow it, you'd be amazed how quickly it can go away. So I would encourage you to not fight it. Allow it. Sounds crazy, but the moment you stop fighting it, you disarm it. So when you feel it, just allow it. And that non-judgmental piece, like Terry's saying, is huge, man. So just being like, not judging what that is. And if you are there, just being present and having that conversation and you feel that come on, you can just be like, okay, you know, it takes time. I'm not saying this is just something you'll be able to do tomorrow, but just practice that. Like, okay, I feel that. I'm going to allow that to just sit there right now as I continue this conversation, and not judging, not letting that talk track take over. That stress will actually just will pass.
One thing that's helped me in those moments on calls where all of a sudden someone says something and you're like, is to either put my finger and my thumb together and just press, or to watch my breath, because there's about 20% of your attention that can go to like your racing mind that's going through all the thoughts and all the things. And then 80% of your attention is on either, you know, the people in the room, your prospects, what have you. But sometimes that 20% of your attention instead of the thoughts can go into like pressing firmly or watching your breath. And that has helped me in those moments where I can't just walk away and calm my nervous system in a different manner.
That's actually amazing, because I do almost the exact same thing. I go like this.
Nice. I love it.
I also wanted to ask Damien, what are some of your, like, I'm sure it's different for everybody. What are your like early warning system indicators that, you know, a mindfulness perturbance, you know, a state of being unbalanced in your mindfulness might be in the cards in the not so distant future? Are there any indicators that for you are like, hey, let's get back to XYZ practice so that, you know, I'm ready when this wave hits the shore?
Got you. So like, what are some triggers that I noticed that I would see, and then kind of it would be kind of like, okay.
Yeah. So for me, I get a lot of shortness of breath. I tend to start taking really short steps and like getting really tense, as you said, in your shoulders. But I was just wondering, you know, what are some of the other indicators that people might want to keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I think, you know, everyone's different, obviously, in this situation, but if there's times where you feel like your mind is just kind of taking over and racing, and you don't really have control over your thoughts, and you just feel like it's tough to be present and to just be there doing that thing that you're doing without the mind taking you somewhere else, that's probably a good reminder to put a bit of work in and get, you know, in that state where you are comfortable being present. I think stillness brings awareness of all state that we're in. I encourage everybody, if you're not doing it, just to sit 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes a day and do absolutely nothing. If you can drink a coffee, a water, a beer, whatever you're into, that will show you how you're really feeling. And then from there, you know, you can kind of adjust accordingly. So for me, it's like when my thoughts are all over the place and I just feel like I'm all scrambled and I can't really control them. That for me is an indicator that I need to kind of slow down and put a bit of work into just being a bit more present.
It sounds like what you're saying is that the best defense is a good offense, and being prepared and being mentally on point and being plugged in that sense in a daily basis is really the only, there's no substitute for that, really, is there?
There is no substitute to that. You are right, for sure. And another thing too, like I think a lot of us might think, if we stop for an hour and do absolutely nothing, that this will kind of be a waste of time. That hour will probably make the rest of your day even more productive, and you'll probably be more aware of how you're feeling, which will allow you to, again, have choice and change. So yeah, I think just sometimes we have to slow down in order to move faster, right? So just remember that.
Yep. Embrace the paradox is one for me.
Yeah, man. Cool. I'm loving this chat too. Blowing up. Meditation. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is too, like, I haven't really come in here being like everyone should meditate. Obviously it's great, but it is tough. It's not for everyone as well. So if meditation is not for you, even just the pause and check is awareness of how you're doing. Eventually building up a practice is great. I would encourage everyone to, but at the end of the day, if you don't, it's okay. You don't have to. It's funny, like you can meditate while one of my favorite meditations is a walking meditation. So I'll go for a walk after work, go for a walk after this actually, and just pay attention to like my steps or sounds I hear or things I see. No phone, no headphones in. I'm just there. That is meditation. So just a reminder, meditation doesn't have to be like sitting on a cushion. It can be taken into your day-to-day and everything that you do.
Cool. Any final questions for Damien?
Scott, meditation is also focusing on the quality of the tequila you're drinking and being completely present to it.
It is.
That is a form of meditation.
I like
No,
that.
I mean, it is. It's quieting your mind, quieting your thoughts, and getting rid of the distracted stuff in our head and the stuff that puts us into fight or flight.
Yeah, and honestly, mindful drinking is my second favorite, aside from mindful walking.
Mindful walking,
totally.
mindful drinking, and Cynthia's doing mindful yoga.
This is
Look
great.
at us coming up with all this stuff.
Yeah,
This conversation's right up my alley now.
Yeah, next time you have a drink, focus on the flavor, maybe be there where it's from, tasting the notes, like that is meditation. That's being present and aware of what you're doing. So hell yeah.
Love that. We're gonna all create a new tequila brand called Mindful Tequila. Big bucks. Big bucks.
Big bucks.
Any parting shots, Damien? Why don't you tell everybody the best way to reach out to you and get us on out of here?
For sure. So yeah, I mean, I'm at that point right now where I'm kind of slowly transitioning into this full time. I'm working with some sales teams, some reps, one-on-one. If you or anyone knows anyone that is interested in either one-on-one coaching or sessions with a sales team, shoot me a line. Hello at Damien Woodfull. Happy to help any way I can. And I mean, if not, totally cool as well. I think if I could just leave and say one thing, it's just awareness and acceptance. Those two words, just take that into your day a little bit. I think it'll go a long way.
Fantastic. Appreciate you being here, spending some time with us, dropping some knowledge. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time on Tequila Tuesday.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate y'all. Thanks, Scott.
Yep. Bye-bye.